Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you all. Yeah, some of you I haven't seen for like many years, and it's so nice to be back in an in-person event. And yeah, last time I was here in 2018. I had a great time at MikroForum. I'm really glad to be back here. So I'm the first heater. So, well, I have to probably go waking up as I go, probably. But yeah, I hope. So today, I'd like to talk about immersive audio experience. Probably it's a good topic to talk about at the beginning of the event because we're going to be talking about immersive a lot. We're going to be saying this word, immersive, a lot of times. But what does it mean by immersive? How do you define immersive audio? When we say immersive, what does it actually mean? Well, is this immersive? This is a 3D listening room at the APL at Huddersfield University. Of course, it has the immersive potential, 24 speakers surrounding you, immersed in the sound field. Of course, it has the immersive potential. What about this guy? Yeah, of course, binaural recording can be very immersive. But does it always provide you immersive experience? So what I'm going to get to is a bit of definition about immersion. So dictionary is always a good place to start with, right? So Oxford Learner's Dictionary defines immersion. The first, there are two definitions. The first one is the act of putting somebody or something into a liquid, especially so that they are completely covered in the state of being covered by a liquid. So it's an acting of surrounding someone or something with some materials like a liquid, water. So that is basically about sensory simulation. In immersive audio or VR, we always use a system that provides this kind of sensory simulation. So the closer it becomes more like a real-world event, it becomes more immersive. So surrounded by the virtual environment, sense of being there. In other words, we call it presence or physical presence in social science term. So that's related to immersive system. But the second definition we found from this dictionary is the state of being completely involved in something. So when you say, oh, I'm so immersed in reading a novel, yeah? So reading an interesting novel doesn't require you an immersive system. You just need a book. But you can be totally immersed in the narrative of the story world, right? So there are two aspects, immersive system and immersive experience. Immersive experience involves both sensory simulation but also cognitive absorption. So how do you define immersive experience? So what I want to do is to separate this immersive system and immersive experience. Because when you just say immersion, immersive, which is used a lot in social science research when they talk about presence, sometimes they say, yeah, we provide presence by immersing, by providing immersive sound field or environment. But then it's not very clear what you mean by immersive then. Are you talking about system or are you talking about experience? So it would be clearer if we distinguish between these two concepts. But then in terms of immersive experience, from all the research that's been done over the last few decades, I could simplify the concepts into these two, presence and involvement. It's a multidimensional construct, so it's difficult to define it in one sentence, almost impossible. But conceptually, we can talk about these two attributes, presence and involvement. So presence is more about the sensory simulation, and involvement is more about cognitive absorption. But then immersive system serves both purposes. So firstly, it provides sensory simulation, presence. But then it also helps you feel more involved into the task. If you're music listening, well, if we are surrounded by all the speakers in 3D, configuration that firstly provides you the sensory simulation, like you're transported into a concert hall where the music was recorded. But that experience could also help you involved in the music itself as well. But then the content is always the first important thing. So if the content is not interesting to you, whatever the system is, it's not going to be immersive. So what I'm saying is, immersive system has the great potential to provide immersive experience, but not necessarily, not always it provides immersive experience. It depends on many other factors. So these presence and involvement concepts, they basically complement each other. It's not two separate concepts. Sometimes presence helps you feel more involved. High sense of involvement by the content itself actually helps you feel more present, like when you're reading a novel, you know, you kind of absorbed into the virtual world, you know, the novel is talking about. So you feel like you're actually there living in the story world, even without any high-level technology. But of course, when you have a great immersive system, that always increases the potential to feel more immersive experience. So this is my hypothesis. So basically, when we try to measure how immersive it is, the overall level of immersive experience could be measured by weighted sum of presence and involvement. So this is a hypothesis that needs to be verified, and I want to conduct some studies into this, which is actually ongoing at the moment in AR audio. But if you want to learn more about this model I propose, there's a paper you can freely download in this link here. This is a comprehensive model that explains how immersive experience can be produced by all of these main pillars: physical presence, social self-presence, and involvement, influenced by all other factors, contextual factors, which I'll talk about today, which is very, very important. When we talk about audio systems, auditory cues, other parameters that we use to create localization, externalization, these are just part of the story. Sometimes they are less important than other factors to provide immersive experience. So we'll discuss that in today's talk. So now these systems definitely have the immersive potential. Better than having just two stereo speakers at top, yeah, because you can do so much more with immersive sound system. Binaural dummy head is great. It can be used for many different purposes. But do we always need this electroacoustic system? When we talk about immersive system, it could be the environment itself. We sometimes forget about the room we are in, and we try to provide some cool 3D effect with the speakers and all the electroacoustic systems. But if the room doesn't provide you what you need in terms of delivering the accuracy in your recording, and your purpose is not served sometimes. But even without speakers, if you're this is York Minster in the UK, later at 11:15 in my session in the 3D room, I'm going to play a choir recording I made in the York Minster. But anyway, if you're there, you don't need the speakers. It's just all the amplification, natural amplification of voices and singing. That's the immersive experience. And the spatial place with long reverb, like 10 seconds of lush reverb, that alone gives you a totally immersive experience. Especially if you like the music, then it's the best experience you can get. Better than any speaker system can provide. What about like cave? Anyone being in a cave? Yeah, you can imagine what it would sound like probably, you know, a children choir singing in a cave, you know. It could be a very immersive experience. If you are actually in the cave, it's a spatial experience, you know, the visuals and the fact that you are in the cave, which is a very unique space, that gives you the immersiveness. But acoustics-wise, you may be very disappointed. It actually could sound quite dry and quite terrible if you're in a cave. It doesn't sound like you're imagining like lush reverb or something. But this experience itself can give you immersive auditory experience. So we don't always need expensive systems, but it's more about the content and the contextual factors and where you are and how you combine all these variables together to provide the right experience. So now let's talk about immersive audio experience. So the model I propose is generally applicable for any extended reality, VR, AR applications. But if we talk about specifically on audio experience, you can still apply this model and talk about presence and involvement. But I'll try to focus on what we call plausibility today and what kind of audio parameters can provide plausibility and how we should consider these contextual factors. I'm a big fan of coffee. Anyone into coffee making? Great. If this picture looks familiar, then you are a big coffee fan, I believe. Well, I mean, this became my best hobby after the COVID started. You know, you was working from home, and you know, when you make coffee, there's 15 minutes that you can stand up and do something else than just looking at the monitor screen. You know, so. But I always find good analogy between coffee making and sound recording, especially acoustic recording using microphones, because it's all about how to combine all these different parameters. I mean, there are so many variables, right? In recording, you need to talk about microphone spacing, angle, distance, polar patterns, and all these factors. But the most important thing is the music, the content. If the sound sources are not good enough, then whatever you do, it's not going to sound good. Like cooking, you know, you need to have fresh ingredients first, right? Coffee as well. I mean, you need to have fresh beans, firstly. Beans are the most important thing. And then you need to think about grind size, water temperature, even the paper type for the, you know, the filter, the dripper type, and it's about getting the right balance. The sourness, the chocolate-like taste, you know, you need to make a balance by adjusting all these parameters. So that takes all the experience and skills, and also you need to learn the principles as well. Anyway, why am I talking about coffee? Because if you don't like kind of sour coffee, for example, that is your personal preference. Yeah, it would be sad if you go to Starbucks and say, yeah, Starbucks is the best coffee in the world because I only go to Starbucks. And that would be sad because there are so many different types of coffees in the world, right? And your preference can change. Sometimes you try something else and then you grow to like it better than what you're already familiar with. So in audio as well, there are so many different opportunities, and people like different things. It's not like you need to do this is the truth, this is one answer that you need to go for it. It's not like that. There are so many different ways of achieving your goal, but it's about what kind of end goal you have and what kind of perspective you want to create in your recording and music production. So first thing is the content. Like I said, the beans are the most important thing for coffee making. The content, if the content is not right, there's a less chance that you get immersed in the music you're listening to. And there are also these contextual factors. Firstly, the preference. If the music you're listening to is not your type, and whatever the system provides, you're not going to get a fully immersive experience. Cultural background is also another important thing. Your expectation, your internal reference. This is something related to this concept plausibility. I'll talk about a bit later. Well, I'll show you this example from Sung-Young Kim's research from 2013. So this graph basically shows the preference on different loudspeaker configurations. different immersive speaker configurations, like different positioning of the high speakers and so on. And as you can see, the black dot, this triangle plots are from Japanese subjects, and the circle, the blue ones, are from Northern American subjects. You see that the results are almost orthogonal. I mean, almost the opposite, right? The pattern's completely opposite. It's about, yeah, what is the preferred speaker configuration with high speakers? So this alone really shows that maybe people from different culture prefer different things. So once you create something that works for you, it may not work for other people. Maybe working in the context of a certain cultural group, but not maybe in other cultural groups. So this is just one example, but there are many other examples that how important contextual factor is. So when you aim to create this immersive experience with your audio or VR, whatever, and if it doesn't work for somebody, it may not be your fault, right? So you don't have to be disappointed right away because if someone doesn't like it or doesn't get immersed, because there are so many things that can affect someone's experience. So it's not a simple thing. We can't just talk about technical parameters, HLTF, speakers, microphone techniques. There are so many different options, but in the end, there are just presets, and you need to learn how to do your things to make it work, to provide the experience you want. So let's talk about plausibility now. So this is a really important aspect in terms of providing a sense of being there, the physical presence. One of the biggest goals in immersive recording is to provide the audience the impression of being in the recorded space, or maybe in some hyper-real space, abstract imaginary space, whatever it is. It's about providing the sense of being there. And ultimately, you want the audience to be totally absorbed into the music listening activity. So when they totally lose themselves, they forget where they are, they forget that they are listening to the speakers, but they feel like, oh, I'm actually there in the concert hall. I can hear the musicians in front of me and surrounding me. That is an ultimate experience we want to provide. But how does it work? And what does it mean exactly? So Slater, a renowned researcher in VR, he provides this definition for plausibility illusion. It's determined by the extent to which the system can produce events that directly related to the participant, the overall credibility of the scenario being depicted in comparison with expectations. So it's about your internal reference. It's also related to your cultural background, how you grew up, what kind of things you're familiar with, what kind of things you like or don't like. So expectation of something being in certain way, if the virtual sensory simulation, whether it be recording or VR or whatever, if it meets your expectation, if it is in line with your internal reference, then you tend to believe that's the true event, the real event that's happening. Even if you know that you're listening to speakers, if the recording that you're hearing is so realistic and natural, then you may forget that actually you subconsciously forget that you're listening to the speakers, but you're actually listening to the performance. So the internal reference is so important, but then do we need to produce 100% realistic replication of the stimuli or environment? So do we have to have perfect reconstruction of the sound field, or do we only need to represent the sound field in a plausible way? These are two sort of conflicting concepts, and There's always somewhere these two worlds can meet in between, the physical, mathematics-driven sound field reconstruction and more psychoacoustic, perceptually driven aesthetical approaches. But these two concepts really help understand how we could approach. So you see this famous movie, Matrix. You see all these flying bullets, frozen in time and things like this. It's never going to happen in real life, right? But when we watch the movie, you may not think, oh, that's not going to happen. That's really, that's nonsense. And we don't think like that when we watch the movie, because we are already immersed in the context, and we kind of grow to believe this is actually happening. And it looks real because the CGI, the techniques they use to create this kind of scene is amazing. It's just high-level technology, immersive system, and that's what Lombard and Deaton calls perceptual realism. It's a realism, but it's a perceptual realism. So you think that this kind of thing could actually happen if the technology was developed, and this could happen in real life. But in fact, it can never happen in real life. But you still believe it in the context of movie. The other example is social realism. Like when you watch animations, all the events that are happening in animations could be something that can actually happen in real life, that's actually happening in real life. But the sensory simulation, the visuals, they're not realistic, they're animated figures, right? They're not real person, they're just animated animal or something, but still, it's realistic, because what's happening in the animation are actually real events. So that's what's called social realism. So how do we apply this in audio? Do we have to make everything 100% realistic in terms of the physical accuracy, mathematical accuracy? If we reconstruct the sound field 100%, does it guarantee that people will be immersed? Maybe not. There's more important stuff, like this. If the end goal is to provide this immersive experience, I mean, we can think about this. When we make recordings, of course, certain level of realism is very important. But then, the more important thing is to make it plausible. While you keep this realism side high enough to provide the immersive experience, the plausibility. And there are other things you need to take care of, like sound quality, tonal quality, spatial quality, and everything else you also need to take care of. It's not just the physical reconstruction that you need to think about. All the objective goals, like to make your HRTF the most accurate, everything is so important. We need to keep pushing to make it more individualized, and it sounds much better when you have perfectly individualized HRTF, and it can really help localizing everything and so on. But that's not everything. So in terms of plausibility, this concept called sensory motor contingency is a really important thing to consider, because without motion and movement, like when we do anything, we always move, we rotate our head, we walk, we touch. This sensory motor contingency that can be supported by the immersive system is probably more important than auditory cues, I sometimes find. I don't necessarily need individualized HRTF, for example. Of course, individualized HRTF helps, but I don't need it all the time when I can rotate my head. I can still localize everything quite nicely, with KU100 or any dummy head individualized HRTFs. But when I have individualized HRTF, that's even better. But the more important thing for me is the fact that I can actually move around and feel the sound from different perspectives. That actually gives more realistic perspective. So head tracking, motion tracking is absolutely necessary if we aim for ultimate immersive experience. The research suggests that even with individualized HLTF, front and back confusion still occurs. When you are head locked, when you cannot move your head, then you still get confusion. But with head movement, then you basically have better resolution, better ability to localize sounds from different directions. Auditory parameters for providing plausibility. So what kind of low-level features we need to think about? Of course, first thing is localization. We are talking about localization a lot these days. So what's the basic difference between stereo and 3D sound? Everybody is familiar with this basic concept, interaural level time difference in the horizontal stereo. Inter-channel differences are translated into interaural differences because we have 2 ears separated apart horizontally. But when we arrange speakers like this, whatever you do between the 2 channels, nothing happens between, well, there's no difference between 2 ears. In fact, there is some very high frequencies because our ears don't look exactly the same. There is some asymmetry between the 2. So at high frequencies, you still have some interaural level difference. But in general, whatever you do with the 2 channels, whether you apply time difference or level difference, nothing really happens horizontally. So more important cues in 3D vertical stereo imaging is spectral cues. Well, unless our ears look like this, well, then everything works fine again. With the normal stereo, yeah, you do that and everything works fine. The panning works fine, everything's cool, but you know, nobody does that. We don't have ears like that. But barn owls do. Did you know that they have asymmetrical ear placement? So the right ear is actually higher than the left ear. You know why? Because these hunters, they need to localize sound vertically all the time. Prey, they look for prey, and then they, and also any predator or any enemy comes from above, then they can localize sounds from above right away because there is interaural difference occurring when there is sound above them. Well, we are not barn owls. And human ability to localize sounds from above, heavily limited. I mean, inherently, we are very limited in our ability to localize sounds above us. And it's shockingly disappointing when you start experiencing this. Oh, I tried to pan something there and there with the Atmos system, but why does it not work? Oh, it sounds like it's there, especially in binaural. It's like there's this confusion. Yeah, is it there? Is it there? I can't tell. Unless something is moving, right? Then it naturally gives you the interaural difference and spectral cues and everything. But static localization is so difficult. So there are other things we need to think about. How to provide natural sensory motor contingency, but also acoustic congruency is very, very important thing I want to touch upon slightly. How much time do I have? I don't want to go over.
14 minutes.
Oh, still? Okay. It's longer than I thought. Great. So yeah, just touching upon this spectral cue thing, this pitch height effect is what governs our vertical localization. So in general, the higher the frequency is, the higher the perceived position of the sound would be. So let's say we are playing 100 hertz sine tone from a speaker up there. Then it's not going to be localized up there at all. It will always be somewhere around your ear height or lower. But if you play higher frequency sound, like 8 kilohertz, then it's always appearing at the position of the speaker itself. And broadband sound, we usually focus more on the higher frequencies, high mid frequencies. that kind of dominate our initial impression. So we tend to localize broadband sound quite accurately when they're elevated or things like that, and then you can move your head and you can hear the sound from the speaker. But if you listen carefully, closing your eyes in an acoustically treated environment, you would probably perceive a big spread of sound spectrally. So you'd hear higher frequencies there and the lower frequencies here. So the vertical image spread is quite large when you play a broadband noise, for example. So this is something to consider when we do panning or recording something with a microphone technique. I generally find no point of putting anything that has low frequency dominance to the high speakers, because it's not going to be localized there anyway. It probably provides you some other benefit. Maybe, I don't know if it is like a reverb, then it could be depth. You can increase sense of distance and depth with a reverb reproduced from high speakers. But if it is like object panning, if you play something like, I don't know, low frequency rumble noise or explosion, it probably is not going to be localized up there. It will be probably somewhere around here anyway. And bird or airplane, these kind of sources, we expect them to be above us because they're physically above us. And you listen to sound and then you probably think, oh, it's up there, because you're used to hearing them above us, and that's what's expected. But if you close your eyes, if you don't look at the speakers and just carefully listen to them, it's not really appearing at the speaker position. You'll probably just about hear. That's experimentally proven. I mean, this is one of the results from our recent experiments. This is had a locked scenario in a treated studio control room, with the speakers placed at every different 30-degree angles. And this is the result for a speaker elevated at 60 degrees. And in the horizontal, in the x-axis, you can see the speaker at different angles in the horizontal plane. So y-axis is the perceived azimuth, and the x-axis is the target azimuth. So ideally, you need to see this linear line if localization works perfectly, right? But the reality is you get this huge front and back confusion, or back to front confusion. Especially when the object is elevated at 60 degrees. Quite higher up is where the Dolby Atmos height speakers are placed. Then you have the front height and the rear height, and you pan your source to the real speaker, not even pan, but just allocate the source to 60-degree front height left, then chances are it may be localized at the back with these kind of practical sources. Bird is a very narrow band source. It's focused just around 2K, 3K. If you analyze the frequency spectrum, it's very limited. So by the pitch height effect, it's already kind of determined where the source is going to be localized. It's not going to be affected by your panning technique or speaker positioning. It's always localized somewhere around here. And it's extremely confusing without head tracking. So with this experiment, we intentionally locked the head using head tracker. So whenever the subject moved by more than 2-3 degrees, the audio stopped and they have to reposition and then localize sound. So this is a very unnatural experience, but still, when there is no head tracking, this is what happens, especially in binaural. If binaural is just like that. You always head locked without head tracker. And this can happen, especially with dry acoustics. If you use dry HRIR, HRTF, it's like you're listening to the sound in an anechoic chamber. And it's a very unnatural experience if you listen to music in an anechoic chamber. It's almost like in your face or inside the head even. So without natural representation of the environment, externalization or accurate localization, they never occur naturally. Again, it's because our auditory system is so limited. We have limited ability to localize sounds just using auditory parameters. There are other factors involved because it's beyond sensory perception. It's actually cognitive process. So research found already the brain adapts to the environment. So this is very quick adaptation process. So the brain learns the acoustic pattern of the room you are in like seconds. So as soon as you walked into this space and you're talking to somebody or hear somebody talking, then this reverb pattern, the time and diffuseness and everything is basically captured by the brain, and the brain learns the pattern. And you already have certain expectation what kind of sound is natural and more realistic. So your brain is kind of comparing the stimulus, the sound that you're hearing, against your internal reference, your template. As you grow up, as you experience in different acoustics, then you have kind of accumulated the database. It's like machine learning. You just trained in many different conditions, and you have certain expectation. And if the stimulus in the real environment meets the template, then that's when the externalization can occur and localization can happen. So there's this really important concept called room divergence effect, pioneered by many researchers. So basically what this suggests is when you're listening to binaural audio, for example, it's difficult to have proper externalization if the acoustics of the binaural rendering. So when you listen to binaural audio, the acoustics within the binaural environment doesn't match the acoustics of the room you're in. Usually externalization doesn't happen easily. So for example, you make a recording of a concert hall performance using a dummy head. Then dummy head is supposed to be the most direct way of capturing 3D sound. And you listen to the dummy head recording in the same space in the concert hall, then you're going to be completely fooled. Oh, it sounds so realistic. I don't know if it is real or headphones, because the acoustics completely match. But when you listen to the same recording in your bedroom, you probably find, oh, why is it so close? Now I don't have proper distance perception. It's just about here, and I don't really feel it's a 3D. That's what usually happens. So the acoustic congruency between the real world and the virtual world is so important in terms of providing this plausibility. And when plausibility occurs, that's when this physical presence, ultimate sense of being there, you can have. So there are many things that we need to think about, also visual cues, tactile, the movement, and visual cues always dominate your perception before the auditory cues. I was sitting on the beach in April, looking at the sea, the waves, and I was hearing the wave sound, and it was about 30 meters away from me. As soon as I closed my eyes, gosh, it was just like the sound, the waves were just right in front of me. Because the beach is like an open field, it's almost like a free field. There's not much reflective energy. It's just very dry acoustics in a way. It's the open air with waves in front of me. There's no acoustic cues like reflections. And everything was like just in front of me. There was no externalization. I couldn't sense the distance of the waves. It was definitely about 30, 40 meters, but I couldn't really localize it because there is no visual cue. So it's so difficult, very challenging to provide proper externalization in binaural audio, and that may not be the fault of auditory simulation, but it's because there are other factors, other parameters missing in the whole grand scheme. So again, it's not just the system that's needed, but everything else. So I'll just briefly show you this result, and I'm nearly done. We did an experiment on direct reverberant ratio manipulation for externalization and overall listening experience with binaural audio content. So it was Dolby Atmos 5.1.4, binaurally rendered using binaural room impulse responses from my listening room you've seen the photo of. And then we manipulated the original direct to reverberant ratio of the impulse response, because you can change the ratio between the direct sound part and the reverb part. And DR ratio is known to be the absolute cue for distance perception. And we wanted to see how, what's the kind of tolerance range of DR ratio in terms of providing good externalization. The ultimate externalization would be that you hear the sound exactly at the speaker positions. This was visual cues, of course, with the speakers at 2 meters. And the results were striking because the difference between the naive listeners and experienced listeners, almost like 11 dB. So basically, naive listeners who have no experience in 3D audio and not experts in music, they chose to increase the reverb by 11 dB to externalize sound properly at the speaker positions. Whereas experienced listeners just needed about the same or even less. Then they could still localize things at the speaker position. So 11 dB is massive, but that's what the difference between the normal audience and experienced people. And similar results with the quality of experience. So they wanted to increase the reverb level, like almost 9 to 11 dB higher than the original acoustics of the listening room. Then they were most happy with the experience. It was like various types of content, film, music, animation, games, and string quartet, and so on. But yeah, so this also suggests that we need to think about the context. Who are your listeners, and what's their experience level? What do they expect? Because from our sound engineering point of view, we always want to make it certain ways. Firstly, to satisfy us, but we also need to think about our audience. What do they expect to experience? The last important thing, we shouldn't forget tonal quality. We talk a lot about spatial things. We're obsessed with the spatial audio, but tonal quality is equally important. This is a result from our recent paper. So comparing all different speaker formats from 22.2 to 9.1, 5.1, and stereo, we tested various attributes: presence, sense of being there, and overall tonal quality, overall listening experience, listening envelopment. The results suggest that presence and tonal quality were most correlated. So tonal quality may seem nothing to do with a sense of being there, but if you think about it, if the sound of a violin you're recording doesn't sound like violin, you probably feel it's not really present. It doesn't sound like you're in a concert hall listening to violin, because it doesn't sound like violin. So tonal quality is probably the most important thing to think about when we deliver this experience. And when we get obsessed with the spatial things, we easily lose the tonal fidelity. It's colored, when you apply filters and spatialization, this is all cool, but you lose the most important thing, the authenticity of the sound. But then interestingly, listening envelopment, the sense of being surrounded by reverb, was most related to overall listening experience. So like the previous results I showed, maybe people like more reverb. People just like it more ambient and like big and spacious. That's related to the experience, but when the tonal quality is ruined, then it loses the presence. I'll finish with this. Maybe you know about this probably. Uncanny Valley.
Ich glaube, wir können schon mal lüften anfangen.
The closer you become to 100% reconstruction, always, by the technology advancing, we can always get to this more close simulation of the real world. But then there is this point where this impression of being real drops dramatically just before it hits the ultimate target. So like a human simulation, it looks a little bit creepy. You know, something's not right with this face, right? It's very close to humans, but something's not right. So when we try to provide this ultimate 3D audio impression, sound field reconstruction and everything, we can get to the ultimate realism by the technology, but we also need to be really careful not to fall down into this uncanny valley. That may be the tonal quality issue. When something's not right, something's phasey and computing and all these strange things going on, it doesn't matter even if it sounds spacious and enveloping, right? So something to think about when we talk about immersive audio. So just one thing, I'll probably just skip this bit. But yeah, we have, I'm gonna repeat this talk briefly in a condensed version and then play some 514 demo in the 3D room upstairs at 11:15. And I also have, like Helmut already introduced, I have a binaural audio demo of headphones. And this is for demonstrating our spatial audio engine we've been working on over the last few years. It's called Aspen, APL Spatial Audio Engine. So we have a plugin to demo upstairs. So I'll be there after lunch today, anytime tomorrow. So please pop up and yeah, we can chat more there. Thank you very much. Thank you.